All right, everyone. Fairly important diplomatic news coming from West Africa, of course, Niger. The coup there has given ECOWAS a suggestion. Of course, they're parlaying in talks right now for how they are going to transition back to a democracy. And they gave a timetable of 3 years and said, look, you back off, don't invade us, and after 3 years or so, we'll be able to return to a Republican style of government. And ECOWAS has rejected that now, so it looks like they're inching closer to the possibility of a war. This is not certain, though. There are other rogue states suspended from ECOWAS who have not met diplomatic obligations for the restoration of properly functioning government, sometimes for years at a time, and little to nothing is done. Basically, you end up with trade embargoes, the cutting off of port usage and things like that. You don't really end up with invasion. I would point out that it would be fairly simple for ECOWAS with its considerably larger military capabilities to invade if they need to. That being said, I'm not sure that it's the best idea in the world. Right now, the junta there or junta, I'm not sure which way it's pronounced. Somebody will jump down my throat for making a mistake regardless, so it doesn't really matter. Right now, they have about 10,000 or so actionable troops to their name, which is the remnant military of Niger. They largely defected. They have some militia, but it's only a few thousand people, so it's not a very large military force. What I've pointed out is that the joint forces of ECOWAS number in the hundreds of thousands. And their main benefactor, which is really Nigeria, Lagos is basically the one running the show with regards to this fiscal and trade union of sorts. Nigeria alone has 250,000 troops, not all of which are mobilized at any given time, but they've got a reasonably sized military. The only other West African nation that's comparable is Morocco, and they're not in ECOWAS, of course. Though they have said that they wanted to join, I think that Nigeria doesn't want the competitor. Actually, right now they're part of a bloc where they're the only major economy, so it sort of bodes well for them. They also have an air force, like an actual functioning air force. They have attack copters, they have fighter jets and bombers and so forth. They also have a shit ton of tanks, almost 400 of them actually. None of the other nations in the area have any. They would be capable of removing the coup. They would be capable of reinstituting a de facto democracy there. Then you run into, however, several problems. One problem is factional, and that is that you have a West African bloc that is predominantly Christian, effectively going into the Islamic world, number one. That creates a sectarian conflict potentially. You already have problems in Nigeria, too, with Boko Haram. Do you think that Boko Haram wouldn't get involved directly? Of course they would. They would conduct terrorist attacks on both sides of that border for an extended period of time, hoping to grind down especially Nigerian forces. And Boko Haram has a considerable amount of localized support in such a fight because it would become factional and sectarian. You also have, of course, native militia who would act alone, homegrown terrorists as they're called when they lose. And so it gets messy. It would become a lengthy occupation. The problem is that doesn't really reinstitute democracy. It allows you to purge the military, set up a new fighting force, and transition it yourself and have a government that you hope is more stable. But it takes time, money, effort, manpower. You're leaving Nigeria less defended against Boko Haram intrusions in its own country, which means that the population there wouldn't necessarily, in some parts of Nigeria, wouldn't be very happy about it. It's really a lose-lose situation. In my opinion, they should definitely extend the timetable for these talks to give room for actual negotiation. The 3-year transition period, what would end up happening is what happens with Burkina Faso. 3 years later, you're still no closer to democracy, and then they tell you to extend the timetable further, basically in recognition that you don't have the balls to invade because of the logistic problems there. It would be, in my opinion, easier to do this in a nation like Niger, because only about a third of its land area is even really habitable. Most of it is Saharan desert. If you push the coup members out of the urbanized southern area that has agriculture, that has settlements, they probably go to a different country. They probably flee to Mali or something like that, because, I mean, they're not going to go out and set up shop in the middle of the Sahara Desert without a supply line. They would die, and they'd die of thirst generally, or exposure to the elements. They wouldn't be able to, I mean, they're not going to set up a military base in the middle of a sand dune 100 miles from the nearest oases. It's just not really doable. And with the air support that Nigeria has, it would be relatively, I mean, against an enemy with no real anti-air capabilities, it would be relatively simple for them to hunt them down. The problem isn't really the coup. The problem is all of the other intercompeting and often sectarian forces in the region that will dogpile you and already are attacking you anyway if you go into Niger. So they can do it, but at what cost? I think that they would clearly win, but what form does winning take? It's a Pyrrhic victory. Yeah, the coup is gone. Yeah, you've restored democracy. Now you have to occupy this nation with 20, 30,000 people while establishing, again, supply routes and everything else, and using up a huge amount of fuel to use tanks and jets and so forth, while Boko Haram is harassing one flank and homegrown insurgencies are rustling your jimmies on a regular basis there, possibly crossing over through Mali, parts south through Burkina Faso. They could get involved, and it could get very messy. Nonetheless, in the end, I think ECOWAS wins. Again, it's just, what does winning mean in such a situation? Boko Haram alone has, how many tens of thousands of people have pledged loyalty to them? It's a fairly significant fighting force. They go around, they destroy archaeological remains, which rankles me a lot. When ISIS was threatening Göbekli Tepe, I was like, maybe I should sign up in the French Foreign Legion and beg to be stationed over in Turkey or something like that. It pissed me off. Yeah. It's just that we don't even know exactly who built it, because hunter-gatherers were the only people at the time, supposedly, and they probably didn't have the resource base to create such a megalithic series of structures. It's more than one, we know now. But they're trying, ISIS wants to blow it up, George Guidestone style, I suppose. Now, those were one archaeological relic that did deserve to kind of turn into a pile of rubble. But Boko Haram they enslave people. They commit random attacks on any government facilities they can access reasonably. There's assassinations and shit like that. Nigeria also already has to deal with them. I guess in their minds, maybe we're already dealing with them. We more or less have them suppressed in most of our country. We can probably spare a few tens of thousands of troops to occupy part of Niger. Again, though, at what cost? That's about all. Peace out.